And we're delighted here to have Sean, who's, as he says up here, he's at Eastern Michigan, and he's the Associate Director of the Office of Wellness and Community. And you were an ombudsman before that?
I worked in the Office of the Ombudsman.
Yes. Okay, well, we're delighted to have you here.
I'm delighted to be here.
Good.
Well, thank you all for having me. So what I'm going to do sort of as I go through this, I'm going to talk about sort of concept of conflict coaching, what's different from mediation, and talk about how we sort of employ a couple of different models and work with our students to use it to help them through some of the conflicts that they experience. First thing, yeah.
Can I ask what's the Office of Wellness and Community Responsibility?
That's exactly what I was going to tell you. So we have a very we have a very unusual conduct office in Eastern. So a few years ago, what happened was that wellness got combined with conduct. And the reason that happened is that wellness was delivering a lot of the drug and alcohol interventions that we were using with our students. We really wanted to create some synergy between the wellness side of the office and the conduct side of the office, and we also wanted to introduce restorative practices. So the way our conduct works is that when a student may be in violation of the Code of Community Responsibility, we bring them into the office and have a discussion with them. And if they take responsibility, our questions for them become not so much, did you do this, but why did you make this choice? And then we actually reference our 8 dimensions of wellness, which I sometimes can recite and sometimes can't, but they range from physical to financial, career, spiritual, which we think of as sort of like a sense of purpose. So we talk about it and we try to generate the reason that the student made the decision that they made. And then we say, how can we work to strengthen this area of wellness to make you more successful in school? Because our other perspective on the conduct is we're not making any sort of moral judgment on your behavior. We're only voicing a concern that this is going to be an impediment to you completing your degree. Now, lest you think it is a free-for-all over there are other conduct issues that rise to a level where we're like, we can't do it this way this time, and we have to consider whether or not you can stay at the school. And those are generally things where we have a concern for other students' safety. So that's what we do. So in that, sometimes what can kind of come up is, and this would sort of be in the social wellness area, is that a student is struggling to navigate conflicts in their life. And that's where conflict coaching might come in for us to work with the student. So this sort of started, and I sort of got interested in it because often we would have these conflicts that, one, we weren't really able to bring the two parties together because both parties weren't necessarily willing to participate in any sort of mediated dialogue or facilitated dialogue. So we were sort of stuck both on the side of the Office of the Ombuds and on the conduct side, we were sort of stuck trying to work with one person to help navigate it. And so through this and through watching some of the things I was seeing in the campus, what I started to recognize is that some of our minoritized students were not any less able to manage conflict than their peers, but the consequences for them were greater. The perception of anger coming from certain students was read differently than from non-minoritized students. I always say, when I talk about teaching folks who are minoritized to better deal with their conflict because it can get them jammed up, I always say this should be a controversial statement. And in my world, it would be a controversial statement, and it is, right? Because what are we saying? We're saying you have to do the work that's been laid on you, for being in this position, and it's not fair. And I would say that's totally true. And yet, I want to make sure that you're successful and that you're able to participate in the world. So my idea in terms of social justice is we need to work for greater social justice and help individuals who are affected by those disparities to navigate them at the same time. We can't make it one or the other. So how does it do that? Well, it helps us to recognize some of the power, the privilege, and the bias that shows up in conflict. sometimes it helps us to aid each other in cultural fluency, so we're understanding what the other person is saying, why they're saying it, what it means coming from them, what you're hearing it as when it comes from you. Helps us to navigate some of those gatekeepers. There are people in this world who feel for one reason or another that only certain people should be let into whatever area they're protecting. And if they can find an excuse to keep you out, they will. So let's figure out how we can navigate those gatekeepers and manage them. And I think that's the other part of it. It's not about managing you. It's about managing the conflict so that you get what you need. And of course, resistance. How do we navigate that resistance from other people and accepting us and accepting our ideas and our positions and points of view? And then also risk. And like I said before, it is, and I don't have data on this. This is anecdata for me. But it's my perception that for some of our students and for some people in the world, there is a greater risk in conflict than there is for other people. And so how do we help to mitigate that risk? So conflict coaching is a one-on-one thing. You're never involving another person in conflict coaching. And it grows out of a number of different things. It grows out of alternative dispute resolution. We use tools from that. It grows out of counseling. I use my counseling skills when I'm doing a coaching like this a lot. And the counseling skills I actually lean on a lot are some of the motivational interviewing skills that I've got. How many people are familiar with motivational interviewing? So motivational interviewing is a great technique to learn just for working with someone. Motivational interviewing it comes out of the drug and alcohol recovery community. And what you're trying to do with motivational interviewing is get a person to a point where they're looking to make a change, right? So we do this when it comes to drugs and alcohol. You'd be asking questions like, well, so on the one hand, I hear you saying that you really want to save money and do X, Y, Z, but you're spending X money on cannabis a week. So help me understand how that works out. So you're trying to create some discrepancies, right? So on the one hand, I hear you saying that you really want to get through school and to graduate and be successful, but on the other hand, you're having all of these issues that are preventing you from doing that. And we want to get to the person to the point where they're like, you know what, maybe I do need to make a change. Or further along in that change cycle, all right, I'm ready to make a change, how do I make a change? All right, I've made a change, how do I sustain that change? So we use a lot of those skills. But I think also you conflict coach from whatever discipline you're trained in, you use your own skills, and that's how you get through it. So when can we use this? We can use this as pre-mediation, right? Let's say you have a client who's going to go into a mediation with somebody other than yourself, right? You can sit down with them, help them work through the conflict, help them get some ideas about how they want to approach things, and then send them into that mediation.
I would say even as a mediator, you can do pre-mediation coaching.
Yeah. And just so you know, I am only sort of familiar with what mediation looks like, what y'all do. This is something that we've developed as a very one-sided, working with a single individual sort of thing. And I have done things where I negotiate between, say, a faculty and a student, and I'm not very good at it. So, yeah, that's where I'm coming from. Also, post-mediation, right? You do the sort of post-mortem on it. Well, how did it go? How could it have gone better? What did you see happening? So all of this is about I never think of it as, okay, we're going to help this person through this one incident. It's skills building. And so I always think everything we do, and remember, I'm still looking at this from a wellness perspective, everything we do should be about enhancing skills and growing strength. So the next time, and the next time, and the next time. Here's what it's not. It's not counseling or therapy. If somebody surfaces something in a coaching session that has to do with mental health or trauma or any of those things, I'm gonna hear it, I'm gonna recognize it, I'm not gonna work with it, and I'm gonna be clear about why. That sounds like that's really something that's really And it sounds like it might even inform the situation we're in here. I don't think I can really work through this with you, but I think that's something you probably want to work through, you know? But I'm not going to take it on. I'm not there to mentor them. I'm not there to talk to them about their career ambitions or any of that stuff. I can do that with them. I'm happy to mentor a student, but it's going to be in a different setting. Right now, we're going to be really, really focused on conflict and how we navigate conflict. I'm not mediating this. I'm just preparing you to engage in a conflict situation. I'm not representing you. I'm not your advocate. Even when we're talking this through, I'm still somewhat neutral. I'm on your side because I'm going to get you where I think you need to be and what's going to be helpful for you. That doesn't mean that I'm on your side in this view. It's not good for remediation. So this is going to sound like the opposite of what I said before. We're not doing conflict coaching after the fact in a sort of punitive way, right? For us, conflict coaching is how do you build up this skill going forward so you do better, not how do we look back at this and fix the thing that went wrong, right? Or punish you by making you go through this course or remediate you in some fashion.
Sean, in our mediations, we sometimes talk to people separately.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll be mediating together, and then we'll say, now it's time to have a separate meeting.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me that that's another time that you could use this if you see that it's needed.
Absolutely,
For
absolutely.
one or both people.
And so what I find is that a lot of times what this helps to do is to structure the conversation that you might even be having already anyway, but it just sort of helps to give it a little bit of form to it. And so some of the things we talk to them about is, really, we've all been talking about conflict. What's conflict? What's conflict in your life? And I like to show them, the big, long expressed struggle between these two interdependent parties and blah, 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 discomforting differences, right? So anything that we're disagreeing about that's making one party uncomfortable, making one party concerned. And so then you can work through them and say, what are some conflicts? We all have conflicts every day. You experience conflict from the minute you get up to the minute you get home and go to sleep, and maybe even that, depending on who you share your bed with and if they steal the covers. So here's sort of the overview of the model and the stages we go through with the students. And honestly, if you have questions along the way, it's fine. Ask questions along the way, or if you have thoughts or insights, I'm cool with that. But we're going to start off by discovering the story. We're going to explore perspectives. We're going to craft the best story, and then enact the best story. So a lot of this really comes out of narrative theory, which basically says that what we are, what we think we are, how we see the world is all about stories that we're constructing in our head. So we're helping them write a story. All right, so I'm going to sit down with the student and I'm going to discover the initial story. And this is the very, very first time. And they're going to tell me, she is so mean. She hated me the minute I came in the classroom, and now she says I can't turn this in late, and everything's going to be from their perspective, and I'm not going to push back on a single thing. Okay? Yeah. All right. And I'm going to ask questions. And I'm not going to challenge them in anything at this point. I'm just looking for more details. So what was the actual due date? Okay, the due date of the paper was, and this was, okay, and this was. And then I'm going to test the story a little bit. So you said that the due date was this, but I'm looking at your syllabus and it actually looks like it was on this, or whatever I have, whatever I'm looking at, and then we're going to get to it. And I'm going to do it in a very non-confrontational way. I'm on your side. I'm going to explore bias. I'm going to explore bias this way. You said that she thinks you're stupid. How do you know that? What evidence do you? Okay, so you feel that way, but you don't actually know that. Because I'm not taking them apart yet, right? I'm just trying to get to a point where they're starting to look at their story and understand some of the points of view that come from them and not from the actual story itself. And then we're going to talk about a few different perspectives. So identity is really important. Why? Because when we feel threatened in our identity, that's linked to a strong reaction. We have multiple identities, both as an individual and a social identity. And our identity is linked to our values strongly. I'll show you kind of how this plays out, at least in the dynamic between faculty and students, which I see a lot. Who we are in that culture is complex too, right? Our identity, how do people see us, how do we think people should see us in our culture? And then it's intersectional, right? I'm this and that and this. And so I am a faculty member at Eastern Michigan University. I am also a woman. I am also any number of different things, right? And so all of those things sort of come together for that person and how they're looking at it. And so first we're really going to pull out their identity. Tell me more about you in this conflict. How do you think of yourself? What do you think, what does that mean to you? How does it feel to be that person in this situation? And really try to get them to take apart themselves. And really think about it from a narrative kind of theory, right? You think about picking apart all of the parts of them that make the character they are in this story. And so then we can look better at how that character is interacting with the other characters in the story. And then we take apart the identity of the other person. Well, what do you think some of their identities are? I don't know, she's a professor. She thinks she knows everything. Okay, so she's a professor. Are there any other identities for her? I don't know. Well, you said she. Well, okay, she's a woman. She's a female professor. Okay. And what do you think that means for her being in university? Well, I don't know. Well, let me ask you, she teaches chemistry. Do you see a lot of female professors over there in the chemistry department? No. Do you think that has anything to do with how she feels? Her identity in that department? So we're really trying to pick these things apart and get to a point where we're really understanding what those other person's multiple identities might be and how they might be navigating the world. And so from identity, we can move on to a real deep dive on the emotions. Well, let's go back to how you were feeling. You said you felt really angry. Why did you feel angry? Because she did X, Y, Z. Okay, but why does that make you, and this is where some of those therapeutic skills come into, because you're using almost something that looks a little bit like cognitive behavioral therapy if you break it apart and you're saying, okay, there's got to be something behind that emotion, right? So not everyone gets angry in this situation, so what made you specifically angry? So we're really pulling apart their emotions. And we also want to look back on how this relates back to identity, right? She seemed really angry with me, right? Well, you know, it's an interesting thing, and I'm just wondering, I want to see what you think about this. You said she's a woman, she's like 65, so when she came into that chemistry department, not only there are not a lot of men there now, but there still aren't, and you're a young man, and you're kind of coming at her. Do you think that that has anything to do with the way she feels? And she's a professor, she probably worked pretty hard to become a professor. Do you think that you're reflecting, whatever you're reflecting to her, might have an effect on her sense of her own identity as a professor, as somebody who's successful, as somebody who's there to teach you? All of these things we're going to put, it's a messy, messy thing that we're doing here. We're breaking it all apart and we're picking at it. And then lastly, we're talking about the power dynamics in the relationship. In my experience, people tend to over or underestimate the power that they have in interactions, right? Students like to tell me all the time, I'm going to go to the president. And you go, oh, okay. You're not going to make it to the president, and if you do, they're going to send you back to me. So you don't really have that power. Or they say, there's nothing I can do, they're a tenured professor. Well, that's not true either. You do have avenues. You have formal avenues, you have informal avenues. You have power in this situation. Even if we look back to the way that power relates to that person's identity, right? Like, what power do you have as a student? What does the instructor want from you as a student? They actually probably want you to succeed. Or they want something from you. There is something relational in that power structure, and you're not completely disempowered. But we can figure out what that power dynamic is. But it's not zero. And sometimes your power can actually harm you in that negotiation, and that's something that's important to see too, right? If you are the top dog and that person is afraid of you, they may in that conflict situation, acquiesce in the moment and then go and do whatever they want to do. Your power may influence how honest they are with you. Their power may influence whether or not they're willing to engage with you. One of the things I'm frequently saying to people who do have power is you don't have to be assertive or aggressive in this situation because your power is inherent, right? You don't have to show your power, it's inherent to your position. You're better off coming in gently. So, this is where we start to talk about crafting the best story, okay? So we have now taken everything apart. And we start to say to the client, to the student, let's put this back together. Let's rewrite this story with these characters. And so we know we have this character, and character A is you. And you are XYZ. You have this much power in the situation. Character B is this person and that person. So now we're going to try to craft, what does it look like if we bring these two people together in a conflict situation and we try to help them to navigate this conflict. And we try to come up with the best possible outcome. And this is when I start to introduce conflict styles to them. And we work through each one. And I'm assuming this is something in your mediation trainings you've studied before, yeah? And so what I'm going to talk to you about is how we talk to a student or a client about the conflict styles. And I'm not trying to pigeonhole them into, I know sometimes people will do tests where they're like, what's your conflict style? And are you a rabbit or an ostrich or any of those things? And I think we all sort of have default styles, but we also use different styles in different situations, right? And so I would say to them, what do you think avoidance is? Right? Avoidance is when you just don't acknowledge the conflict at all. Is that good or bad? What's bad? Yeah, I guess so. That's what we call lose-lose. Do you know why it's lose-lose? We try to get them to the point where they understand that it's lose-lose because I haven't gotten to express my concerns or have my needs met, and the other person hasn't had a chance to grow from that conflict situation. And then I would say to them, so is that a bad or a good way to approach it, conflict? And they would say, most likely they'd say it's bad. I would say, well, let me ask you a question. Let's say you're driving in traffic and somebody cuts you off. Is that a good, do you want to engage them? Or is it better to just take the loss and avoid the conflict in that situation? I think generally it's better to avoid that conflict in that situation. There's not a whole lot to be gained from, excuse me, sir. Excuse me, I noticed you're not driving very well and I would like to give you some pointers on how to be a better driver in the world. That's not going to go well, right? So that's a time when we would be fine with avoidance. And then we talk about competition, right? And sometimes we do want competition. Sometimes that works. There has to be a victor. Generally, that means one person's winning and the other person's losing. And then we would say, in this conflict, what does it look like if there is a competitive win? If your instructor wins and you lose, or if your friend wins and you lose? What does it look like if you win and they lose? And then at this point, we can also start to talk a little bit about the point of managing the conflict. And that the point of managing the conflict is managing the conflict, not necessarily getting the outcome that we want. And that's something that I try to stress with them a lot. You're going to probably continue to have a relationship with this person. And so the question is, when this conflict is over, where is the relationship? And what conflict approach is going to cause the least amount of relational damage? And we sort of work through this. So let's say you win. Let's say you go nuclear, and you go to the department head, and you go to the dean, and the dean comes down on them, and what does the rest of your semester look like? Do you have to take more classes with this instructor? What does that look like? So you can see where there's relational damage in result. You got what you wanted, but now you've got some problems that you have to deal with. And so you've managed the conflict to your advantage, but you've caused some damage that you're going to have to deal with down the line. We talk about compromise. and why it's no win, no lose. Why sometimes that isn't the best. Now none of us are getting what we want. We've all got half a baby. And so that's not great either. What does it look like in this situation if you compromise? We talk about accommodation, where one person's giving in and doesn't get anything in return. We talk about what that would look like. And then we really, really try to stress collaboration, because this is where we're trying to craft our best story, right? So in our best story, let's say, what does it look like with the two of you, with these identities, with these power structures, with all of this? What does it look like if you two work together with that other party to achieve a win-win outcome? And that's how we're going to try to craft our story, because I believe that's our best story that we can craft. Now, that might not be what we end up with. That might not be what the reality of the situation looks like in the end, but we're going to craft it that way. And we're not going to treat it as factual. We know the whole time that this is our aspirational outcome. And we know they're going to have trouble visioning this. We let her keep them really grounded in it. And then we go skipping happily off to France, and we retire, and let's stay here. So we're just trying to get through this one moment, okay? We're not on to the next thing, we're just doing this right now. Probably not going to end up with a completely coherent narrative, and there are other narratives that we can go with. And so then, pretty much what we're doing is we're sending them out in the world to have this conflict if we're talking about a specific conflict, or we are meeting with them again later as they've thought through some of these tools and thought through some of these events, and we're debriefing on how they might do some of those conflicts. And hopefully they'll bring new conflicts back to us, and we can go all the way back to that first thing we looked at, all the way back to here, right? But now we'll have more skills and explore more perspectives and craft even better, more realistic stories, and hopefully enact stories that are even closer to our best story. And so that's what that looks like for us. It's a fairly new program, and we're starting it. We've done a few students so far. It's working nicely. And I can report back later on what our outcomes are, but that's where we're at right now.
So how many sessions does this involve?
So what we would do with this one is, depending on the amount of time we needed to take with a student, that first one is probably going to take at least 2 sessions. And then if they come back, it would be a third. And if they want to continue to come back and see us, we would certainly continue to do that with them.
So 2 sessions and then they go out and try to resolve the conflict.
Yeah, and so sometimes it's not that we're actually sending them out to resolve a specific conflict. Sometimes what it is that we are working through conflict situations as a means of skills building, but not necessarily, and sometimes you really are preparing them for a specific conflict, right? I need to talk to somebody about this, right? But sometimes it is more just sort of skills building, like a tabletop.
How much time do you envision this taking?
So each
Because
session,
sometimes I think some of these things just need some cooking time, you know.
it depends on the student, right? So we do these meetings we schedule for like an hour, and then there's a gap in between, and then try to get them in, like, if we're doing 2 sessions in the same week, right? But it's sort of, so when the student comes up with the action plan, it's sort of self-directed. We generally would say, well, you're going to meet with me 2 times for conflict coaching, or you're going to meet with me 3 times for conflict coaching. And then we'd offer them the option to return if they wanted to.
Now, are these usually crisis situations?
Nope.
No.
Nope.
Just everyday conflict.
These are situations where we would have somebody who, let's say, so it would be different if I were using this in the office of the ombuds, rather than in the conduct office, right? Because here we're talking about skill. You have had an altercation. I wonder if we can strengthen this social skill of yours by helping you to learn conflict better. If I were doing it in the office of the ombuds, it would probably be one longer session preparing the student to engage, because they come in with problems, right? Rather than coming in with the aftermath of a problem. So like, let's say I have somebody who's continually having conflicts on campus. This might be an action plan for them, right? As a skills building exercise. If somebody came into the office of the ombuds and said, this is the problem, this is the specific problem I'm having with my instructor and I don't know how to approach her, that's when we would do this in preparation. But I'm not over there now, so I'm not doing it in that context. But it would certainly work in that way. And I think that what I would suggest is one longer session where you do the whole thing, come up with an action plan. It's going to be easier and faster with somebody who's coming into the ombuds office, because if we, back to sort of using that motivational interviewing model and the stages of change, they're already at, I want to address this problem. Less than like, hey, maybe there's a problem in the way you're dealing with conflict. So it's going to be a faster thing.
So I've used this with people who want to mediate, but they can't get the other person to sit down.
Mm-hmm.
And so to go through this with them in terms of what is it that you would like to accomplish and how might you approach this person to accomplish it without me as a mediator.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether that's a model that could be used by the center, but it seems to me that there are a number of people who can't get the other side to come, and so this might be something that the center could offer.
And that's really what we found, right? Like, what do you do in those situations where you want to give someone a better way to address conflicts in their life, and nobody wants to come in and sit the other person? No, I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
Because that's what you need at baseline is 2 willing participants, right? And so from a restorative justice perspective, right? What do you do when you want to apply restorative principles but only one party is interested in participating?
So this is the sound of one hand clap.
How do you tell that you've been successful?
That's a good question, and I don't think we've got really our assessment in place for it yet. You know, we've just been winging it in terms of doing it. I think that if you have a chance to do a debrief with the person after they've had a conflict, you can get a sense of whether or not they've been more successful in managing their conflict. But I think we would have to come up with some sort of tool for evaluating, and I think we're not there yet.
In terms of you mentioned the power struggle, and then in just some cases that you've just been in the room and you notice that there is a power struggle,
Yeah.
and especially being with the professor and the student, it makes sense that is. So what is your feedback was that to stay neutral, even though you feel the power struggle yourself?
Well, so in this setting, right, I'm working with one person to break down the power struggle. So we're going to consider that, like I said, from that identity perspective, right? So here's one of the things that made me realize that we had an issue that we sort of needed to deal with. We were seeing a consistent problem where we would have a young black male in conflict with an older white female professor, right? And until I started focusing on this, every single time I was like, God, what is with these ladies? And they don't like these black kids, right? Once I started doing this, I also said, that could be true. That could be true. They could be racists. It could also be that, just that example I was sort of using before, that as women coming up through the university and all of that, they have some power dynamics and identity things where they really feel their power being threatened, especially when it's coming from young men. So I can't throw either thing out, right? And for our young black men, they are very sensitive to feeling like somebody is asserting power over them in an unfair way. So it's the intersection between all of those dynamics. Once we can start to pull it out and talk about it, right? So if I'm dealing with either side, I can get them to say like, yeah, this is where I'm sensitive to feeling my power threatened. This is where they might be sensitive to feeling their power threatened. So I don't know a way to deal with that power dynamic except to call it out and look at it and say, oh, here we are, okay. This is what I'm trying to protect.
One of the ways I was thinking about not, well, taking it beyond just the coaching aspect, but one of the ways the restorative practices that, at least in conferencing, if you don't have the other party is not willing, in this case, the victim, let's say, or the person harmed, perceived harm, you can get a substitute or a surrogate. And at some point, I think depending on where this evolves for your office, a surrogate to play the other party.
Yeah, and I thought of that. I thought of that too. Do we do some role play or something like that? And I think that could be useful. Yeah, or even some Gestalt empty chair sort of things where they're just at least getting a chance to act out what they think is going to happen.
I was just going to say that interesting thing about, I've used conflict coaching too, the Jones and Rickert model, and I think the coach can actually engage as a surrogate or as a role playee, you know, in that process. That can be part of skill building.
Yeah, yeah, I think that makes sense too. James?
I'm looking at, like, trying to figure out, because this wasn't available when I was in college, and this is something new. It seems to me it's more like teaching some of your clients, your students, introspective work.
Yeah.
Really how to deal with their own feeling, what the power is all about,
Yeah.
and also a lot of, it's amazing the narrative comes out. I mean, it's so important to go and dig into your own narrative, your identity, as you're saying.
Yeah.
It's really,
So one of the things that I frequently
and you said it's not therapy, but in a way it is. They go away doing
yeah, I mean, there's a lot of
some-
crossover in that stuff. So one of the things that I frequently say about our office is that, yes, we are a conduct office, but we are an office of student success, right? So everything we should, and I think that should go across the line for any office in the university, that everything we're doing is geared to make the student more successful in their university experience and beyond, right? So hopefully they came into us because they got jammed up for something, right? We offered them, it's also, by the way, really important, we would never do this with a student unwillingly. They have to choose to do this. So we would say to them in our initial meeting, you know, we do this thing, it's kind of cool, it's kind of fun, we like doing it, most of our students participate in it, like doing it. You want to do that for your action plan? And they're, frankly, they're so glad that they're not getting kicked out of school, they're willing to agree to anything. But we really do try to make sure, that they're doing a thing that is meaningful to them, that is important to them. So they have to be sort of motivated to go into it in the first place. But I also think it's skills that they take, these are soft skills that nobody's teaching in the classroom, right? And so they're skills that they can take with them outside of the university when they go into the working world or to their next degree or whatever they do.
And these are skills sometimes you can come to the level of college student and never have experienced that in your life, in your upbringing, in your culture. So it could be something where it's something new and you're really preparing them for life.
Yeah, actually, well, you know what's funny is that I actually spend a lot of my time on the phone with faculty coaching them through conflict. And I think it would be beneficial for some of our people in positions of power to learn how to better manage conflict from that position. Because, and the thing we really try to stress is this is not about managing, this is not about winning, this is really about managing that relationship, these ongoing relationships. This is a part of community building. This is a part of making sure our community works well.
A story. I was doing this at a school in the Detroit area, and one day there's a second grader out in the hall having a meltdown. And when I went up and asked him and he listened what was going on, he had a substitute teacher that day. Substitute teachers are good to them and to him. And I asked him why this was a problem, and he says, because it's another old white woman. And he says, can't you be our substitute teacher? And I said, I have to tell you this, but some people consider me an old white woman. And he says, but you're not like them. But see, he had had some bad experience, and the children had, and they had discussed this, and so it was school-wide, maybe even district-wide.
Yeah.
And it was built in, and they had an emotional response without even knowing why. He just had the biggest one that day, because the whole class was bad. So I was remembering that this is something they're not even aware of, maybe. And
Yeah,
it's come from a long way back.
You know, and that was one of the other reasons for us changing our office over to function in the way that we function right now, is we had a realization that for some of our students, and not just across the board, we have so many first-generation students, we have so many students with Pell Grants who come from different, all of it, who've had bad experiences, especially with institutions affiliated with the state, right? That we might be their first interaction with the university outside of the classroom. And so we have to take every opportunity we can to grow them in whatever wellness aspect we're concerned with, and in a way that's not going to make them feel like we are another institution that's there to cause them harm.
What's the history of this?
I took from two different ones, Jones and Brinkert and
Cindy Noble.
Cindy Noble was the other one, yeah. So I sort of combined the two to come up with a model that we could use.
But who at the administrative level said, this is something we gotta do?
Me. I took it upon myself.
That's a good way to do it.
Yeah, it's the fastest way to do it.
Yes.
I mean, technically I'm administration, I'm really low-level administration, but...
Well, you had to convince some people.
So, if you're talking about the overarching thing, yes. But there was a lot of buy-in. It was more like the convincing had already been done to transform the office into the Office of Wellness and Community Responsibility, and I was tasked with it. And so, they were like, make this better, and combine it with wellness, and then figuring out how to do that fell to us, and we worked that out. And just now we have a lot of leeway within that.
Is this very widespread? Did you have other universities to look at or to contact and
Other
talk
people,
about?
so in terms of conflict coaching, I don't know if other people are doing conflict coaching. Alternative dispute resolution, yes. And like U of M is all over it. They're incredible over there. In their conduct department is Oscar, Office of...
Student conflict resolution.
Yes, and they're rock stars. They're amazing. Their whole model is to have students working with students, and it's we don't have the capacity to do what they do, but other schools are doing really killer stuff. Any other questions, thoughts?
Tell us some success stories.
Well, we're fairly new in it right now, but I think we've had, I think 3 or 4 students that we've done so far. Our last one, what our biggest conflicts are, we see a lot of conflicts that turn violent actually between young women in the dorms, which is interesting. We actually see more physical altercations between young women than we do between young men. So we had a woman in recently who had a conflict with her roommate, and I didn't do this one, but I think she'd actually changed rooms because of it, and it was now separated from her roommate, and I think it had an earlier conflict. So she's been doing really, really well. She's on her 2nd session. She's a freshman, so that's one where we really hope that, and if she's at a point where if that sort of thing keeps up, she could end up with a separation. So having her engaged in this and having her going through it, I think is hopefully going to be a success. We'll see where that lands. But that one's good because I'm glad she was willing to engage in it, especially being so new to the university. It's a tough transition from high school too. Anybody else have anything?
I was just thinking this could be used on teams, sports teams.
I mean, I think some form of it would be really good in a lot of different situations. You know, and it's also, you know, one of the challenges in doing it with this age group is we are talking about people without fully formed frontal cortexes, right? So they're so it-driven, it really can be challenging to get them to see all of this stuff. It's also, and I don't even know if I would try it necessarily with some of our, I shouldn't say that. I would approach it differently with some of our students who are on the autism spectrum, so we have to sort of be aware of neurodiversity when we're doing stuff like this. I think that because of some of the theory of mind challenges that students on the autism spectrum have, doing this much work about understanding how this person feels and you feel, and that's different, can be harder. And so we probably do something that was more, and I haven't done this yet, but just thinking it through and making sure it's something we would be able to offer to everyone regardless of their ability. We'd probably have to create it in a different way that was more rules-based and structural rather than built on emotional ideas and things like that, which just could be harder.
How about other cultures, either foreign students or?
And we haven't had that experience, we haven't done that yet, but it's something where we'd have to really tease out of them that information. You know, I don't know. Tell me what it's like when, what is the conflict look like for you in your experience? Do you think that's cultural, or do you think that's you? Do you think, you know? And so we just pull all of that out.
Even, I'm thinking, even if you have siblings or not, if you grew up in a house with other kids, or your only child, or.
Yeah, and that's definitely some of the stuff when we're talking about. When we're talking about the conflict styles, it can be a larger conversation.
Yeah.
Really, why do you think you do that? Okay, we're not going to talk that much about your mother, but I get it, right?
I'll add a comment if you have.
Yeah.
So the DRC does not formally do conflict coaching, but it seems to be happening organically with phone calls that come through. Most of our cases are referred or ordered by the court, so people are compelled to come and sit in a mediation or circle or whatever they do. But those that are not ordered or referred by a court or some other institution, I think it was maybe a few years ago where I noticed that the staff in the office would get a repeat caller who wanted to use mediation, but the other party didn't. So we would go through, we have a process, we make several touch points with the respondent, the other party, to see if they would engage, and if we don't get a favorable response, then there's a no, because there's some very strict guidelines about what is a case at the DRC. And then sometimes the other party just won't return the call, which we take as a no after several attempts. But that initial caller, maybe they live in they're neighbors. They can't afford to move, especially in our low-income and subsidized housing communities. You can't just up and move because I hate my neighbor. You have to figure out how to coexist. And I noticed that we were kind of, in some kind of way, pseudo-coaching them through how to rethink the narrative, how to just doing some probing and getting a clearer story, because the first call is that they are a horrible, hateful neighbor and they won't stop the behavior. But after you have a few phone calls, you're finding out that that initiator is also doing some things to agitate, dousing a little bit of fuel in the fire as well. And so it was that kind of conversation that will very organically unfold. And I said, I think to Miles one day, I said, Miles is saying, I said this, I hope it was okay that I did this or did that. It's technically not a case for the center just because it doesn't meet those guidelines, but I said, I think you're coaching a little bit. Not in a biased way, you're not taking a side, you're just giving them some tools and strategies to sort of navigate that terrain to get to a better outcome. And that sort of sparked our interest in conflict coaching. So formally, I don't think that we're prepared to do that, but it seemed to just be happening. Last fall, I think, at the beginning of the school year, I went to Sean's presentation at Social Justice Day at EMU's School of Social Work, had a Social Justice Day. We intentionally set in on your presentation. I had heard about Sean through one of your co-workers, Julia, because we do some other stuff out in the community, and she said, I need you to meet him, and I hadn't. But then he had this presentation, it was like, oh, it sort of started building a frame around some of the behaviors that we were doing in the office anyway. It's like, oh, okay, we can call it something, and there's a real skill around it. Then the question now for us is, should we be doing this? When I think about the juvenile court cases that are beginning to gain momentum and come through, more restorative circles that are happening, it's clear to me that in most of those cases, the participants do not have the skills, tools, communication skills, or anything to navigate the conflict. So they are in court because they could not, none of this stuff was happening in the home. Most of our juvenile court cases, most of them, not all of them, are offenses against the parent or caregiver. So none of this is happening around communicating a narrative, identifying a need, even saying, this is why you bug me. So it feels to me that in those cases, and I'm just looking at those that can probably go across the board, I get it, but is there an opportunity, as well as in caucus, some tools for caucusing, as Sally mentioned, is this an opportunity when we're working with a teen, a 14, 15, 16-year-old who says nothing in their first session, they don't trust, they're not sure how to articulate. So I see this concept being useful in some of those ways, but formally, are we ready to launch? I don't think so. I think we need to do more skill building and sort of play with this role play and all of that as a group internally, but I'm definitely seeing some ways that we can apply it with some of our, and I think it will make the difference, because with the juvenile cases specifically, the goal is to divert them from that system. So if they cannot, it's not just about problem solving in that moment. Yes, I'm gonna do my chores, I'm gonna respect curfew, I won't push you again. It's about their ability as a youngster to have some tools that they can think, hopefully rely on as they continue to grow and that frontal lobe is still in its development stage. That's my biggest fear. They're kids, they're gonna do something stupid again, but the next time the police are called, the next time there's a report to the prosecutor's office, they will not be afforded an opportunity like us for problem solving. And unless we get a new prosecutor that change, we will get a new prosecutor because of the election, but unless that new prosecutor comes in with a different mindset, they will not get a chance for this opportunity again. So I'm just over here churning, like, how do we load this up on what we're doing to give these kids an opportunity to not just divert that system, but to stay out the system, because the next time they're gonna go to detention, they're gonna do time, that could be 30 days, but it's still doing time. They will have a probation officer could be up to 6 months, depending on the severity of it. And these are felony, some of these are felony charges. Assault charges, and it's a felony. So that will impact their ability to go to college, job, when you think about reporting and getting a job after high school, and apartments, and that independent living that we want all of our children to have, that will be, that certainly will be impacted by that. So again, I'm just sort of reeling about what do we do with this more formally or directly, and how do we sort of build our skills internally so it can be another tool for us to rely on when, instead of saying, oh my God, this circle isn't working because this kid won't talk, we have something else that we can maybe employ to kind of stimulate some conversation about it. So that's my 2 cents.
Sounds like somebody, other people at the court or the circle keepers also need some coaching.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree that internally, when I say internally, I mean our volunteers, the staff, how do we work through this to kind of build our own skills so we can have that tool. I still would think that I have to start thinking of ways to develop opportunities for us to work with this, learn more about it, because as you all know, you're the volunteers. When the staff gives you that case file, we walk away and close the door. We're dependent on you to implement whatever that model is and use all the tools that you have to move the case forward. I'm not asking you to do crazy things to settle cases, but I just want us to make sure we feel very equipped to do the things that we need to do to get people to engage in the work that we're doing. So that's what I'm thinking about over here, quietly. Oh, Mary, yeah, your hand.
In my small mind, it appears like it's a good place for us to start, because as you look to the next pass-off, if what we do doesn't affect the person, the next person down the chain starts talking that way. My, you are big. My, I see this a lot. And all of a sudden that is being formed in him through their coaching, which is probably not really coaching, but that's just their language. So if we don't, then we've really done some damage or added to it. So we got to stop the dialogue somewhere before it goes much further.
Yeah.
At least their perception of it.
From the cases, just a response to that, from those cases that have gotten through and been diverted, so about 4 or 5 cases, I've lost count, have actually completed itself and has been diverted, so the kid does not have a juvenile record. And the parent, and in a few of them, the kids, said in open court that this process was very helpful. They had an opportunity to talk and be heard. And they appreciate, like the parents are saying, someone listened. One parent said, for 2 years, I've been looking for help with my, who was then 14-year-old daughter, who was now 16. For 2 years, I was looking for help, and I finally found a group of people that just listened, and they heard my cry, they heard me, and the need for support. And so just being a thought partner in those circles was helpful. And I think you were doing this, you were helping them craft a different narrative about what family counseling looks like. And I mean, this is an African-American family, we don't typically like to go to therapy, we go to church. That's just part of our culture. But in that circle, that's what they talked about, the ability to talk through and have thought partners to help them reimagine what the household could look like, and now they finally feel that they're there. And it was a beautiful last hearing from my perspective. So anyway, that's what I'm thinking about.
Sean, are you willing to share your slides?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
If you send them to me, and if I have your email addresses, which everybody who signed in should have given me their email address. If I don't have it, I'd be glad to send them on to you.
I think you could also tailor this in much different ways, in much simpler ways, with much simpler language, much different storytelling techniques depending on who you're working with.
Well, I'm glad that you referenced the authors or whoever, Jones, and maybe we can start looking into that material and curating a
Would you be willing to help simplify it?
I would be interested in that, yeah, because I think I also...
Did you hear that?
I'm also interested in the idea of how you would use some of those motivational interviewing techniques.
Maybe that's a different round bag. Yeah.
Just to get them to that point. I've worked with people in that age group and a lot of resistance.
Yeah, and I just think in general, in this business that we're doing, we're a community center. I don't even think, I think maybe once or twice a year we turn a person away from our services, and that is because of violence. Like, we're concerned about violent behavior in a session. So what that means is that anybody who says we want to use your services, we welcome them in. But what that also has developed, what that has done for the center is that the emotionality and the issues that they bring are so much more complex today than they were when I started working at the center in 2003. And just maybe life circumstances have made things very complex. So I just, and I've seen heads nodding, but if that means that we need more tools to help us do what we're asked, what you signed up to do as a center volunteer, then please, I want to be able to be responsive to that. So maybe we'll talk offline to see what else.
Yeah.
What else you got up your sleeve you can share with us? I saw, Ruth and then Elaine. I'm sorry, Mary and Elaine.
Part of what I was coached in had to do with telling stories. That was the Native American way of getting points across without coaching or doing things. And that might be something like you telling a story about your large son. I mean, I could have done that too, and they would have seen it in a different light without actually using clinical coaching terms.
Elaine, then Huda.
I was just going to say, I think Trish Jones would be also eager to help if we're looking at trying to modify or simplify or make some adaptations to her materials. After going through the training, I contacted her to do some work with my organization before, and she was thrilled to do it, so.
Okay, thank you. And who,
And I just wanted to add, I mean, I'm thinking about Zaytuna.
Mhm.
When we started, it's on a company, and we were talking Israel
Does
Palestine.
everybody know what Zaytuna is?
12 women, six Jewish and 6 Palestinian.
That have been meeting since 2002, every 2 weeks.
19 years. Yeah. And so, and what really helped us more than anything, other than using dialogue and having a talking, passing around, is spending 1.5 years on the personal narratives. It is so important. And I tell you, the 1.5 years, I think we went through so many Kleenex boxes. We were crying mostly. I mean, it's all women. So emotions are, that's why we made it only women. Because we tried mixed before, it didn't work. So that's why my husband went and formed male. So, but it is so important, the narrative. Because in it you come, your identity, your culture, your stories, all of that you were talking about. And it's so powerful.
And I also think we have to, I'm not trying to hijack a presentation just because my brain is moving. I think another piece of this puzzle is the concept of time. So just learning from our native friends about peacemaking, they talk about that a lot. So if we're going to let people tell their personal stories, we can't watch the clock. We can't say do it in 2 minutes or 3 minutes. Some cases doesn't give us a finite amount of time, and some cases might lend itself to that, but that also means your personal time. What expectation do you have? In mediation, we can say our average mediation is less than 2 hours still, after many, many years. A lot of small claims are factored into that data bundle. The peacemaking cases, I think we're a little more than 2 hours because we're doing more storytelling. Everybody gets to answer the same question in their own time span. So we're seeing a little bit more time added to that, and more sessions, by the way, added to that as well. So, that's just another thing to think about as we continue to evolve. We do need our volunteers to evolve with us if you're asking me to go out there and hustle for these cases. I don't want it to be the court. I don't want 5 minutes at the podium and somebody's telling you what to do. So if we're different from that, then what does that really mean? So I think we have our own, I sort of grapple with who are we as an organization quite frequently with the DRC's board, as we look at data and all of that. So just one more piece of the puzzle. Sorry, Sally or Sean.
Okay, well, thank you, Sean, very much.